Today, we're diving into an ancient conflict that was so intense, its outcome literally shaped the world as we know it. I mean, this wasn't just some old story. It was a high-stakes, all-out showdown for the soul of a nation. And it all came down to one single dramatic question.
Just think about that for a second. What if everything you believed in, your entire culture, your future, what if it all depended on who controls the rain? It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But for the people in this story, it was the central question in a battle that could have completely rewritten history.
The stakes here were just astronomically high. This was a battle between two colossal forces, Yahweh, the God of Israel, and Baal, who is the super popular god of all the surrounding nations. And as our source, Dr. John Oswalt, points out, if Baal had won this thing, it's very likely the whole nation of Judah would have fallen away, and the Bible as we know it, well, it just might not exist.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we have to understand the contenders. This wasn't just a fight over whose name to chant. Nope. This was about two completely opposite, totally different ways of seeing the world, reality, and God himself.
So, first up, who was Baal? Well, he was the god of the storm, the god of rain, crops, fertility, you get the idea. And in a place like Canaan, that was a huge deal. See, unlike Egypt with its giant Nile River or Babylon with its massive river system, Israel was completely 100% dependent on rainfall. If it didn't rain, people starved. So Baal was seen as this powerful force you had to keep happy just to survive.
And this is where you see the huge difference between them. Baal was seen as part of the world, a natural force that, if you did the right rituals and said the right things, you could kind of manipulate to get what you wanted. But Yahweh, totally different. He was presented as being completely outside and above the cosmos. You couldn't control him, you couldn't manipulate him. The only way to relate to him was through trust.
And that really brings the whole conflict down to a super personal level, doesn't it? Do you want a God you think you can manage, a God that feels predictable, one that serves your needs? Or do you go with a God who asks for your complete trust, even when, and especially when, it makes no sense at all? That was the choice right in front of Israel.
So, right into the middle of this spiritual crisis walks one of the most intense and dramatic figures in the entire Old Testament, the prophet Elijah. And he doesn't just, ease his way in, he explodes onto the scene, immediately throwing down a massive challenge to the king and his God.
I mean, can you believe the nerve? This is an absolutely audacious opening shot. Elijah strolls up to King Ahab and just declares a drought. He is basically marching onto Baal's home turf, the world of rain and storms, and announcing that his God, Yahweh, is taking over. The fight is officially on.
You'll notice as we go through this whole story, one phrase pops up over and over again, the word of the Lord. And Dr. Oswalt points out this is so important because it highlights the big contrast. Baal's idols, they had mouths, but they couldn't speak. They were silent. Yahweh, on the other hand, is the God who speaks, who reveals himself through language, who gives direction.
So what follows isn't just a series of random magic tricks. No, it's a very carefully planned, escalating demonstration of Yahweh's power. It's designed to systematically prove that he's in control of every single aspect of life that people thought Baal was in charge of.
Dr. Oswalt uses this quote from C.S. Lewis that just frames this perfectly. These miracles aren't just for show. They are these bright, intense sparks of divine revelation happening at a make-or-break moment in history.
So you can see the progression here. The miracles build on each other, and each one claims a little more authority. It starts with power over nature. Then it moves up to power over the food people need to live. And then, finally, it climaxes with a demonstration of power over the ultimate forces, life and death itself. Let's break it down, starting with that first sign.
So, the first sign starts out pretty simply. During this drought that Elijah himself declared, God sends him to a brook to get water. Okay, makes sense. But then something wild happens. Ravens, wild birds, start bringing him food every single day. So God is using the natural world, sure, but in a completely unnatural way, just to provide for his prophet. But then the brook dries up, and God ups the ante. He tells Elijah to go nearly 100 miles away, straight into Phoenicia, which is literally Baal's backyard, to be fed by a starving widow. I mean, this is a massive test of faith. He's being sent right into enemy territory for help.
And when he gets there, the situation is about as bad as it could possibly be. The widow tells him, "Look, I'm gathering sticks to cook the very last meal for me and my son.
After we eat this, we're just going to lay down and die. You can just feel the complete and total despair.
And this is where that whole idea of trust gets incredibly real. Elijah asks her to do something that sounds crazy. Make a little loaf of bread for him first from the tiny bit she has left. It's a radical request. He's asking her to give from her last ounce of hope and then see what God will do with what's left.
And the result? It's just astonishing. She does it. She trusts, and for the rest of the famine, her jar of flour and her jug of oil never run empty. Yahweh is showing his power over the basic necessities of life, flour and oil, symbols of fertility, and it's a direct shot at Baal's supposed domain.
But just when it seems like things might be okay, the ultimate tragedy hits. The widow's son, her only child, her only hope for the future, gets sick and dies. So now the demonstration escalates again, from power over food to the final frontier, power over life and death itself.
In this moment of just raw desperation and faith, Elijah cries out to God. He stretches himself out over the boy's body, and life comes back into him. This is the ultimate sign. It shows that Yahweh has authority not just over the weather or a jar of flour, but over the very boundary between being alive and being dead.
But the story doesn't just stop there, with the big, flashy miracle. See, the real purpose of all these events goes way deeper than just a power display. It's all about revealing who Elijah truly is and why that matters so much.
This right here, this is the widow's final statement, and it's the key to this entire story. Notice what she says. She doesn't just say, "Wow, now I know your God is really powerful." She says, "Now I know that you are a man of God." The miracles were there to prove his character, to prove that his message was the truth.
And this is the really profound point that Dr. Oswalt makes. Think about it. Prophet is a job title. It's a role you play. But man of God, that's an identity. It's a description of your character, your very nature. It's about who you are. And that is the foundation for anything you could ever do. And really, this story kind of pushes us to ask that same question about ourselves. We all have roles we play, right? At our jobs, in our families, in our communities. But this ancient showdown seems to suggest that what really matters, what's far more important, is the character we're building underneath all of those roles. Who are we actually becoming in the deepest part of who we are?